The heavyweight champion of the world, stood at the polished oak entrance. The manager looked at his brown skin, then at the whites only sign, and said the words that would change everything. "We don't serve your kind here." Nobody in that Atlanta restaurant expected what Muhammad Ali would do next. It was a humid evening in downtown Atlanta, Georgia, June 1966. The summer heat still clung to the streets, even as the sun dipped below the skyline. Muhammad Ali pushed open the heavy glass doors of the Continental Club, one of the most prestigious restaurants in the South. The place screamed old money. Crystal chandeliers hung from vaulted ceilings, white tablecloths, sterling silver, the kind of establishment where senators and business tycoons made deals over aged bourbon and prime rib. Ali wore a sharp charcoal suit, crisp white shirt, and a thin black tie. His shoes were polished to a mirror shine. He looked every bit the champion he was. But in 1966, Atlanta, none of that mattered. Behind the host stand stood Gerald Whitmore, a thin man in his late 50s, with silver hair slicked back with pomade. He'd worked at the Continental Club for 23 years, and in his mind, he was protecting more than just a restaurant. He was protecting a way of life. When Whitmore looked up and saw Ali approaching, his expression shifted from professional courtesy to cold calculation in less than a second. But what the manager didn't know was that sitting 3 tables away was Robert Hayes, a journalist for the Atlanta Constitution, and he was about to witness something that would make front-page news. Gerald Whitmore straightened his bow tie and stepped forward, positioning himself directly in Ali's path. "I'm sorry, but we're fully booked this evening," he said, his voice dripping with false politeness. Ali stopped. His hands relaxed at his sides. His breathing was calm. This wasn't his first time facing this kind of treatment. "I don't need a table for many," Ali said, his voice carrying that distinctive rhythm. "Just one seat at the bar would be fine. I'm here to meet someone." Whitmore's jaw tightened. "Perhaps I wasn't clear. We are a private establishment. We reserve the right to refuse service to anyone." "Anyone?" Ali asked, tilting his head slightly. "Or just anyone who looks like me?" The words hung in the air like a bell that couldn't be unrung. Across the dining room, conversation stopped. Forks paused mid-air, because what happened in the next 60 seconds would expose everything this restaurant had been hiding for decades. Whitmore's face flushed red. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to leave. This is a respectable establishment with certain standards." "Standards," Ali repeated, his voice still calm, but carrying an edge now. "Let me ask you something, Mr. Whitmore. Mr. Whitmore, if a white man walked in here wearing this exact same suit, would you tell him you're fully booked?" Whitmore opened his mouth, but no sound came out because they both knew the answer. Everyone in that restaurant knew the answer. Robert Hayes, the journalist, had pulled out his notepad. His hand was already moving across the page, capturing every word, every pause, every moment of this confrontation. At a corner table, a young couple, Thomas and Linda Morrison, watched with growing discomfort. Linda leaned toward her husband and whispered, "Tom, that's Muhammad Ali, the boxer." Thomas squinted across the dim restaurant. "You sure?" "Positive. I saw him on television last month. That's the heavyweight champion of the world standing there getting refused service." And what happened next proved that sometimes the greatest fights don't happen in the ring. They happen when a man refuses to accept being treated as less than human. Whitmore, sensing he was losing control of the situation, raised his voice. "I don't care who you are. We have rules here. And those rules have been in place long before you walked through that door." Ali didn't raise his voice, didn't move aggressively. Instead, he did something that made Whitmore even more uncomfortable. He smiled. "Rules," Ali said softly. You mean like the rules that said I couldn't drink from the same water fountain as you? The rules that said I had to sit in the back of the bus? The rules that said I wasn't good enough to fight for my country, but wasn't good enough to eat in your restaurant? The dining room was completely silent now. 35 people, all white, all wealthy, all watching this scene unfold like they were witnessing something historic. Hayes was scribbling faster now, his journalist instincts screaming that this was bigger than a simple restaurant refusal. This was Muhammad Ali, at the peak of his fame, being denied basic human dignity. Mr. Whitmore, Ali continued, his voice carrying to every corner of the restaurant, you've fought the best boxers in the world. I've stood in rings where men twice your size tried to knock my head off. I've been hit so hard, I've seen stars. But you know what hurts more than any punch? Whitmore said nothing. Being told you don't belong somewhere just because of the color of your skin. Being looked at like you're less than human. Being treated like your championship belt, your success, your dignity don't matter because you were born looking like me. But then something unexpected happened. A voice from the back of the restaurant cut through the tension, and nobody could have predicted whose voice it would be. Mr. Whitmore, I think you need to reconsider. Every head turned. Standing up from his table was Judge Richard Caldwell, a Georgia Superior Court judge in his 60s, a man whose family had owned plantations before the Civil War, a man who represented everything the Old South stood for. Whitmore looked shocked. Judge Caldwell, I'm just enforcing our policies. Your policies are illegal, Judge Caldwell said, his voice firm. The Civil Rights Act of 1964 made them illegal. And if you don't seat this man right now, you're not just being morally wrong, you're breaking federal law. The judge walked slowly toward the entrance, his footsteps echoing on the hardwood floor. When he reached Ali, he extended his hand. Mr. Ali, I'm Richard Caldwell. I apologize on behalf of this establishment. Would you do me the honor of joining me at my table? Ali looked at the judge's outstretched hand for a long moment. This was a test, a moment that would define not just this night, but what it meant to bridge divides that seemed unbridgeable. Ali shook his hand. I appreciate that, Judge. I truly do. But I didn't come here looking for special treatment. I came here expecting to be treated like any other American citizen walking through that door. And what Ali said next would become one of the most quoted moments in civil rights history, because he wasn't just speaking to a restaurant manager anymore. He was speaking to an entire nation. Ali turned back to Whitmore, who now looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. Mr. Whitmore, you see that sign on your door? The one that says Wits only? That sign is illegal. It's been illegal for 2 years now, but you keep it up because you think you can ignore federal law. You think you can decide who deserves dignity and who doesn't. Ali's voice wasn't angry. It was patient, almost gentle, like a teacher explaining something to a stubborn student. I could force my way in here. I could call the police. I could make a scene and get you shut down. But you know what I'm going to do instead? Everyone waited. I'm going to walk out that door, not because you won, but because I refuse to give my money to a place that doesn't see my humanity. I'm going to walk out, and tomorrow, every newspaper in this country is going to read about what happened here tonight. Ali gestured to Robert Hayes, who was still scribbling frantically. That man over there? He's a journalist, and he's been writing down every single word you've said. By tomorrow morning, the whole world will know that the Continental Club refused service to the heavyweight champion of the world because of the color of his skin. Whitmore's face went from red to pale white. But Ali wasn't finished, because what he did in the next 30 seconds would teach everyone in that restaurant a lesson they'd never forget. Ali walked slowly past the tables, making eye contact with every single diner. When he reached Thomas and Linda Morrison's table, he stopped, Excuse me, folks, Ali said politely. I don't mean to interrupt your dinner, but I want you to remember this night. I want you to remember that you sat here and watched a man get refused service because of his skin color, and you didn't say anything. Not because you're bad people, but because silence is easy. Speaking up is hard. Linda Morrison's eyes filled with tears. I'm so sorry, Mr. Ali. You're right. I should have said something. Ali placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. Ma'am, the fact that you recognize it now means something. The question is, what will you do the next time you see injustice? Will you stay silent, or will you be like Judge Caldwell here and speak up? He continued walking, stopping at another table where an elderly couple sat frozen. How about you folks? Do you think what happened here tonight was right? The elderly man, William Preston, cleared his throat. He'd been in Atlanta his entire 72 years. He'd grown up in a different time, been taught different things, but something about Ali's dignity, his refusal to fight back with anger, had shaken something loose in him. No, son, Preston said quietly. It wasn't right. I'm ashamed I didn't speak up. Outside, a crowd had begun to gather. Word had spread that Muhammad Ali was inside. But what they were about to witness wasn't a champion throwing punches. It was something far more powerful. Ali reached the door and turned back one final time. Mr. Whitmore, I'm going to leave you with something to think about. You see me as a black man in a white restaurant, but I see myself as an American citizen in an American restaurant. The difference between those two views is the difference between the past and the future. He pushed open the door. Outside, nearly 50 people had gathered on the sidewalk. Some were black, some were white. All of them had heard that Ali was inside. When they saw him emerge, a young black woman in her 20s stepped forward. Her name was Dorothy Williams, and she worked as a secretary 3 blocks away. Mr. Ali, what happened in there? Ali looked at the crowd, at the cameras that had started appearing, at the moment crystallizing around him. They refused to serve me, he said simply. But that's not the important part. The important part is what we do next. A reporter from WSB-TV pushed forward with a microphone. Mr. Ali, are you going to press charges? Sue the restaurant? Ali shook his head. No, because forcing them to serve me at gunpoint doesn't change their hearts. Real change comes when people choose to do the right thing, not when they're forced to do it. But then someone in the crowd asked the question that would change everything, and Ali's answer would become legendary. A young white college student, barely 20 years old, spoke up. Mr. Ali, if you're not going to fight back, if you're not going to force them to change, then what's the point? Don't they just win? Ali smiled. That famous smile that had charmed the world. Young man, let me tell you something about winning and losing. I've won championships. I've knocked out some of the toughest men on this planet. But the biggest victory I ever had wasn't in a ring. He paused, letting the moment build. The biggest victory was learning that my dignity can't be taken from me. It can only be given away. Mr. Whitmore in there, he can refuse me service. He can keep his racist sign on his door. He can live in the past. But he can't make me feel less than who I am. He can't touch my soul. He can't diminish my worth. Ali pointed back at the Continental Club. That man thinks he won tonight, because I'm leaving. But tomorrow, the world will know what kind of place this is. Tomorrow, people will choose where to spend their money based on whether a business treats all people with dignity. Tomorrow, change will come, not because I forced it, but because people demanded it. Robert Hayes's article appeared on the front page of the Atlanta Constitution the next morning. The headline read, "Champion Refused. Muhammad Ali Turned Away from Whites Only Restaurant." By noon, protesters had gathered outside the Continental Club. Not angry mobs, but peaceful demonstrators carrying signs that read, "We don't dine where Ali can't," and "Closed to Ali equals sign, closed to us." Within 3 days, the Continental Club's business had dropped by 70%. White customers, faced with the reality of what their silence supported, chose to eat elsewhere. Within a week, Gerald Whitmore was fired. Within a month, the Continental Club removed its whites-only sign and issued a public apology. Judge Richard Caldwell wrote a letter to Ali, thanking him for handling the situation with such grace. "You taught me that real courage isn't about fighting," the judge wrote. "It's about maintaining your dignity when others try to strip it away." Dorothy Williams, the young woman who'd asked Ali what happened, was so inspired by his response that she became a civil rights organizer. She would later say, "I watched the greatest boxer in the world choose peace over violence, education over revenge. If he could do that, so could I." Thomas and Linda Morrison stopped dining at segregated establishments entirely. They became donors to the NAACP and spent the rest of their lives working for racial equality. "We were challenged that night," Linda would later recall. "Ali asked us what we would do the next time we saw injustice. We decided we'd never stay silent again." And Muhammad Ali? He continued to face discrimination, continued to stand up for what was right, continued to prove that you didn't need violence to be powerful. You needed conviction. You needed dignity. You needed the courage to walk away from places that didn't deserve you, while knowing that your action would speak louder than any punch. Years later, a young reporter asked Ali about that night at the Continental Club. "Do you regret not forcing your way in? Not making a bigger scene?" Ali smiled. "Young man, I made the biggest scene possible. I showed the world what they were, and I showed myself what I was. That's not a regret. That's a victory. Because that's what champions do. They don't just fight in rings. They fight for dignity, for justice, for the simple right to be treated as human beings. They float like butterflies through hatred and prejudice, and they sting like bees with truth and grace." And on that humid June night in Atlanta, Georgia, Muhammad Ali proved once again why he truly was, and always would be, the greatest.